We're live. Go with our little disclaimer.
Perfect.
Yes. Original thought, culture, self sufficiently, and smarter conversations. That's what we're here to do, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, young and old. I don't know whether to say it's a sad thing or if it's like a celebration, commemorative thing, but for lack of better words, felicidades en el día del grito de Lares a todo el mundo. I always tell this to all my jibaritos and jibaritas. And we're still fighting. We're still here. They can't fucking get rid of us. Deal with it. Here we are and shoot the shit once again. Joey Zaza with John and Juan Riestra once again. I'm so happy to have you here, brother.
Me too. Estoy bien motivado. Thank you for the
Yeah.
invitation.
So let's start it off like this. Like we said we were gonna start it off. I heard that originally El Grito. Oh, we should start off. Why don't you explain to people what the Grito de Lares is?
Absolutely, sure. It is the most famous rebellion from Puerto Ricans against Spanish rule in the 19th century. It happened on the 23rd of September of 1868. And there's a bunch of mixed feelings, like you said, whether we commemorate it or do we celebrate it. I think
It happened at
we
nighttime, correct?
correct,
Okay.
absolutely. And I would say it's a mix of both. We commemorate the event, which failed. They failed to achieve independence, evidently. But so there's reasons to commemorate events, fallen heroes. All countries had commemorate moments in which fallen heroes um, sacrifice their lives for the ideals. Um, but also, there's a reason to celebrate. There's a reason to celebrate the fact that Puerto Ricans, like you said, we've been fighting ever since, and even before that. So it's the rebellion of independence, the uprising of the rebellion of independence, the most important one under Spanish rule,
Why
1868.
why was it the most important one?
Because there were many others, and I would say
Was it because of
it's
its magnitude or just the quality of people involved?
I kind of think both. The quality of people is a maturity. It shows a maturity of the pro-independence movement compared to previous movements. Betances and Ribelvis, the top leaders, proved to have a well more developed a plan that was much more developed compared to other rebellions that were planned before. And also, yeah, the amount of people involved, we'll never know the exact number, but it seems to be way bigger than anything that happened before. And also, I would say it's the one that got farthest, considering that they took over a town and were close to taking a second one, right? And there's two ways of seeing it, though.
Which
You,
one was
I
the second one, San Sebastian?
San Sebastián del Pepino, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. So the two ways I would say people can interpret it or value it or study it is whether we study the event that happened on the 23rd of September and the next day, or we see the entire plan and the project behind it and the people involved, um, which is the bigger picture. I think is the most valuable way to really appreciate it.
So
Okay.
almost like looking at it long term versus short term, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Both long term, thinking about all the preparation and people that got involved, and also long term, the people that continue to be involved afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have two ways we could start this. There, one of the common things that are, I don't want to say it's a rumor or I don't want to say that it's a fact because there's it goes back and forth. It, things were ruined because of a snitch, but I've also heard another story of things were rumored because a Spaniard overheard.
Yes.
I don't know whether to start with that. We could start off with that, or we could start off with what we had said that originally the Grito de Lares was not going to be the Grito de Lares. It was going to be the Grito of Camuy.
Uh huh. Hmm.
So how do you want to approach it?
It would be nice to begin with that last question you said because we can see the plan and then the outcome. Um, because if not, some people won't understand why we celebrate an event that apparently just lasted 2 days and only in two municipalities. Playing the devil's advocates, there's some people that don't sympathize with independence. There's some people that
Did
are
they
critical of
actually
it.
get to take San Sebastian?
They were close to, yes, but they didn't take San Sebastian.
What
Um,
what's considered close?
they were downtown and they fought with the main forces of the militia, and there were some parts of the militia that were supposed to join the rebellion, but for some reason did not. Yeah, it was very intense. Um, so I think it's interesting to see the entire plan, because a common misconception that it's a small thing. I always see Lares as the tip of an iceberg. There's a big organization. There's a bigger Puerto Rican revolution that was meant to begin with an uprising that would be a chain reaction that would lead to a bigger war of independence, like what happened in Cuba. Cuba is an
And not
example of
just here, right? It was supposed to go across all of the Antilles, all the
absolutely,
Caribbean. Oh, okay.
absolutely. So Lares is a spark. It's not a huge revolution if you see Lares only, but it's a spark that is in a fuse that is carefully planned with a fuse and all the dynamite and all the preparation. So you have to see the entire plan. If not, people will not understand. It would seem that we're making a big fuzz out of a spark, and a spark doesn't kill anyone. A spark doesn't do anything unless you see it in the wider context. A spark with a fuse and leading to a well orchestrated series of explosives that were
Yeah, you
carefully
know
planned.
what? Now that you said that, the my grandparents' generation and my family, most of them, not all of them, the ones who weren't considered radicals in the
Mhm.
family, they all kind of spoke of it like it was a why do you want to go there? Why do you want to learn? It was
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
a little
Yeah.
thing. And at least for me in school, they just barely
Mhm.
touched it. That they had this,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
didn't even.
Yeah. Yeah. People say there's
It
a
was
lot
a
of
lot bigger
propaganda.
than what we're usually taught.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's why it's important to understand the difference between the event and the process. The event is El Grito de Lares. The process is the Puerto Rican Revolution, which is a wider thing, right?
So
Um,
how would you compare that? You calling it a spark? It makes me think a lot of the Haitian Revolution because
mhm,
um, El Grito de Lares was, correct me if I'm wrong, the first major revolt in Puerto Rico against the Spanish government.
mhm,
And like you were saying earlier, is a spark, and it led to other things happening. And
mhm,
it's kind of the same to the Haitian Revolution, which was
mhm,
more or less the first revolt in the Caribbean that just had, it was the epicenter of just a gigantic thing. It inspired
mhm.
the Dominicans, it inspired the literally everyone. So
Absolutely.
how is it comparable? Would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful example. The Haitian Revolution goes beyond the events that happened in Haiti.
Hmm.
It's like a spark that has a chain reaction throughout the Caribbean and the entire world. I would say the British abolished the slave trade only 3 years after the Haitians accomplished their independence. And the Haitian Revolution itself began with a small uprising in a local place.
Yeah.
Many great revolutions begin with a small uprising. El Grito Yara in Cuba and El Grito de Dolores in Mexico it's another example of how a small uprising can snowball into something larger, right?
And there were Puerto
Unless
Ricans in both, fighting in both, correct?
there were Puerto Ricans in the revolution of in Cuba, absolutely. It's definitely the revolution in the Antilles that had most help from Puerto Ricans in terms of people joining the fight. I believe it's Cuba. Cuba had hundreds of Puerto Ricans fighting for the independence of Cuba, which for them was a way to fight for the independence of Puerto Rico because it was part of the Antilles, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that yes, the revolution had plans not been frustrated, was meant to be in Camoy the 29th of September, the
Okay, the
29th of
same month.
September. Yeah. and the revolution in Puerto Rico, only 6 days after Lares happened, right? So the 29th of September in Camuy, perhaps, we're not sure. There's many things we don't know for certain because many of the documents were secret, many documents were lost. But apparently, it might be because Camuy has access to the coast, and Betances was expected to return alongside other Puerto Ricans to bring more guns and more fighters, right?
Where was
Um,
Betances at this time?
Betances is it's commonly said that Betances was in St. Thomas. Other studies say he was in Curacao. The point is that he was forced to move from Puerto Rico in
Mhm.
1867, and he was constantly on the move from Santo Domingo, New York, St. Thomas, and often also Curacao. So it's like a constant moving of Betances, sending people back and forth to Puerto Rico, guns and proclamations of independence, um, and communication with the local groups in the island. Every major town had a secret junta, one in Camuy precisely, which apparently was very, very important. It was called Lanzador del Norte, was the name of the secret society in Camuy, Lanzador del Norte. The one in Ponce was called Lanzador del Sur. They all had code names. Mayagüez was called Capa Prieto. Lares was called Centro Bravo, and San Sebastián El Porvenir. Um, but sometimes I wonder whether these were actually the five most important places: Ponce, Camuy, Mayagüez, Lares, and San Sebastián, or whether those are the four that we know of. Perhaps there were others that were equally important, and simply we lost the information. But there
Yeah.
were also secret organizations in Yauco, in San Germán, in Aguadilla, Aguada, Añasco, Arecibo, Vega Baja,
Isabela, right?
Isabela, absolutely, yes. Juana Diaz, most of them the southwest, a few of them in the east, but very few. Carolina, San Juan, there was a group in San Juan and in Vieques, but most of them
So,
is
so the west
southwest.
side was pretty much in the front line of.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
definitely, definitely, yes. And it is for me super interesting because Betances managed to organize a rebellion after a decade of nonstop secret clandestine organization, right? Something that had not happened before. The previous pro-independence movements from the 19th century, I will name them very briefly so you get an idea how much where they were. One was in San Germán, 1811. There was a group in San Germán, 1811, and they were discovered the next year. So that we know of, at least 2 years they were working. That was a very good plan because it included the local government of San Germán, the municipal government of San Germán, the local leaders of San Germán, people from different social classes, and also people from the municipal governments of Aguada, of Ponce, of Coamo. So that was a big deal. But only 2 years of preparation that we know of. They were discovered only a year after. Another one was Maria Mercedes Barbudo. There was a woman in San Juan that led uh, a secret organization for pro-independence in the 10 years later, 1823 or 1824. And she was discovered. That group was discovered. And we don't know how long they've been working before they were discovered, but as far as we know, at least 2 years, perhaps more, but there's not much more evidence of them
Well,
organizing for 2 years.
question:
Yep.
were they working independently, or were they all working together? You know, that their names were just divisions as far as where they
I've been
reside.
I've been trying to see if there's any connection from the group of 1811 and 1823, and it's difficult to find connections. I haven't
Because
found
I
clear
mean,
connections. Yeah.
people who are watching this think of this. There's 78 different municipalities, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, it's only 100 and something by 40. This 100 by 35 is not completely accurate, you know, but it's
Mhm.
what's common. But
Mhm.
there's a lot of places to be and live and hide and all this. If everybody was working individually, how insane of an OCD freak was Betances that he could actually grab all these people and okay, we're all going to work
Absolutely.
like one
Absolutely.
machine. That's
Absolutely.
an insane
That
organization
absolutely.
skill.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Insane organization skills. I would completely agree. That's beautifully put because yeah, if you want if you want to be very successful in a revolution, you need more people. But the more people you get involved, the easier it is to keep a secret. And he pulled it off for almost 10 years. They were discovered at the end, but more than being frustrated at being discovered, I'm more impressed with the fact that since the late 50s till the late 60s, they managed to operate in secrecy. Every other group, as far as I can tell, were discovered after 2 years of revolutionary activity. There was another group in the 30s. I'm not sure how long they worked, but they were discovered perhaps after 2 years or something like that. That was going to be a military coup. That was going to be intense. 1838, with many military leaders involved in Old San Juan. They were going to take over the governor and declare independence from the military fortresses of San Juan. So that was impressive. And that was discovered because of a snitch, because of spies. Since 1810, at least, Spain increased the amount of spies in Puerto Rico. In the 1810 decade, there was a governor called Salvador Mendez Bruna that was incredibly successful with that. The one that came afterwards in the 1820s, his name was Miguel de la Torre. And Miguel de la Torre is the guy that fought Simon Bolivar in South America. So this guy was super important. So for South Americans, it's like Darth Vader, the imperial enforcer fighting the rebels and defeating them time after time until he was finally kicked out and the rebellion succeeded. So after fighting Bolivar for so many years, the main antagonist, the main enforcer of the empire in South America, goes to Puerto Rico and rules Puerto Rico for 16 years, Miguel de la Torre. So that's a long time. An expert fighting against rebellion. And I get the impression that he took it personally. He said, I failed Spain in allowing South America to break free. I have to restore my reputation and prove that the rebellion will never reach Puerto Rico. And he had a crackdown on everything. He eliminated Cofresi, for example, and pirates. He eliminated slave rebellions. A lot of slave rebellions were brought down. He executed slaves, and he would personally go to see the execution of slaves in Ponce and in other places.
Wow.
And he dismantled every single pro-independence movement until it was impossible. And he ruled from 22 to 37. So it was a long, long time. It's difficult to point a finger and to say who's responsible for Puerto Rico not being independent. And you can't name one person. But if you were to make a list of which individuals receive more credit to maintain Spain in control in Puerto Rico, perhaps Miguel de la Torre is a good example of that. And the spy network that was already very high before he came was elevated, in my opinion, to the British level. I think Spain was close to the British level of.
Okay, hold on a quick second. I'm gonna paint myself naive for a quick second. When you say spy, are you talking straight up movie Jason Bourne? They swear he's born and raised in Puerto Rico, talking like the Jibaros mixing in type spy shit.
Yeah,
that is
definitely.
insane.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the people you would less expect. There was one dude, for example, who was supposed to be the good guy. There was a moment Spain had a liberal revolution and removed military governors from power and implemented a democratically minded liberal Spaniard called Francisco Linares Gonzalez. And he was super popular among the liberals in Puerto Rico. He allowed the Constitution to be implemented, freedom of speech and everything. And then he was replaced by Miguel de la Torre after Spain returned to absolutism. And Miguel de la Torres used him as a spy in St. Thomas. The best spy. Yeah, no, that's crazy. It's super bizarre. And he's the guy that was spying on Maria Merced Barbudo, the woman that was leading the revolutionary group in San Juan. So
What is the motive? Okay, fine. Like the most effective spies are the ones you least expect. I get it, but
mm,
like that though. What motivation did he have to make? Did he have like blackmail on him? Did like do this
that's
or
a
we kill your kid type stuff or what?
that's a good question. I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
know. There's many. The documents are silent on most of the time on personal
Motivation.
motivations.
Hmm.
Um, but it would be interesting to research more on that. I think there's
Yeah.
not enough research on uh, the level of spies. Yeah. Um, so that's
And at
impressive.
the time, I imagine they were realizing the economic advantages they can have in becoming landowners in Puerto Rico. So whatever I have to do to grab a couple of
Mm,
100 acres,
mhm.
yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't put it past them at all because it's not like it's unheard of.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. He's
there'll
only
be many
human.
ways. Yeah, there'll be many ways to bribe people. Um, so that's the 30s. In the 40s, the revolutionary activity in Puerto Rico and the early 50s, I see that I don't see much in the 30s and the 40s. And I would say that the difference between the pre-Betances and the Betances revolution group um, is that the pre-Betances group still had the advantage that South America and Mexico and Central America were still on their process of independence, and they were still interested in fighting Spain because it would benefit them in their process to become independent. So you would find Simon Bolivar, for example, preparing a
So
plan
for
to free Puerto Rico.
historians and like yourself,
Mhm,
there not so much a gap, but like a moment of somewhat tranquility. But
mhm.
could it be because the Spanish just didn't know about it? Because they were the
Could be,
ones documenting the history anyway, weren't they?
could be. That is a legit hypothesis. So I
Okay.
wouldn't discard it. You know. Um, so, but either way, the pro-independence movement in Venezuela and South America and in Mexico by the 30s had already consolidated, ended their wars, and Spain eventually recognized the independence of those countries. So there was no more of a threat for them. So they had less of an incentive to help Puerto Ricans out. So Betances basically begins a revolutionary movement alone. He's alone. He doesn't have any people before him. He can't find another generation to train him. He can't find the old revolutionaries of the past to say, this is what I did. This is
Mhm.
what worked. This is what didn't work. He's starting from scratch. In that sense, he's similar to Albizu because when Albizu begins,
Because everybody else already got what they wanted, so they're like, "Fuck! Oh, that's some
Mhm.
bullshit."
Yeah.
I read this thing that I found a little amusing. How before he got to the point where it's like, fuck it, let's do an island wide revolt. Um, they tried to do it. The they try to do it civilly, like, in a civil way, basically through the government. Hey, let's get these reforms.
Yeah.
But Spain and Spain pleasing government officials kept like shooting down reforms, so it couldn't be done officially. And in one
Well, if they're
meeting,
shooting down people, I would imagine they're shooting down fucking reforms.
yeah,
Hello.
Yeah.
right, obviously,
Definitely.
but
Definitely. Yeah.
basically, I read earlier how after listening to the junta members' list of voted down measures, all of their failures that the government refuses to address the reforms,
Mhm.
balances stood up and retorted, "Nadie puede dar lo que no tiene." You can't give away what you don't own. And apparently that became like his motto.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was referring to Spain. Spain can't be democratic for herself, for her own people.
How's it going to be
Why?
for like a colony? Exactly.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And there were many very well-intended uh, Puerto Ricans that were liberals that agreed with Betances, but hesitated on the revolutionary step. And you're absolutely right. That junta you mentioned,
So they
uh, uh,
agreed with him, but they wouldn't help him.
they agreed with the goals, not with the means. And Betances listened to them and said, okay, let's give reform a chance. And suddenly, out of the blue, Spain in 1866 and 1867 said, okay, Puerto Rico and Cuba, send a committee to propose some reforms. But I promise you that I can't promise you those reforms would be implemented. So it was just a mere message without any expectations that they were going to be heard. But it was better than nothing, because the last time Spain allowed Puerto Ricans to send representatives that were democratically elected in Puerto Rico was 1823. 1823, and then we jumped to 1867. That's a long time. It's a long time. So anyone that voted in the last elections is dead, or is very old, you know.
Yeah.
So um and there's many great patriots like Valdoriotti, like Jose Julian Acosta, like Tapia, and there's famous meetings when they were secretly meeting to decide, should we do revolution or reform. And Betances would say, okay, let's do reform, but I'm not, let's try reform. But I'm, like you said, Spain can't give what Spain doesn't have.
Yeah.
And after that, they realized that none of the reforms, which included abolition of slavery, included more hospitals, included more schools, included permanent representation in the Spanish government, um, and freedom of speech. So many things that are valuable, that everyone could agree back then. Most Puerto Ricans wanted those things. When Spain decides that none of those would be approved, the only reform approved was one proposed by government officials, like you said, and that was to increase taxes.
Oh,
No
Yeah,
joda.
I'm shocked. Oh my
yeah, no,
god.
it was shocking. It was shocking. Yes,
So
yes.
are you telling me that Spain, that was in the middle of all these unnecessary wars, and they had a fucking thing in the Dominican
Mhm,
Republic and all
mhm,
that?
mhm,
Are you telling me they were running low on money and they wanted to
mhm.
raise taxes on the colonies?
Absolutely,
Joy,
absolutely. Yes, that was
Joy,
awful. Yeah,
Joy, yo no me lo esperaba. I'm shocked.
Yo,
yeah,
John,
yeah, yeah,
John,
yeah.
I'm gonna let you make $10 a month, but you owe me 20 in rent.
Yeah. No, 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 Chacho. It
20
was
for the
horrendous.
house.
Yeah,
Shocking.
and
I'm shocked.
yeah, and that's the moment Ribelvis and Betances made the final. They would say, "Reform or revolution? We tried reform. Let's go all the way." And it was heartbreaking because some said yes, some said no. I was reading just a few months ago the memoirs of one of those persons that were there, and how difficult it was to say no to Betances, and how Betances would lose his patience, say, "Come on, please join me with this. You can help a lot in the revolution." And the others were,
Especialmente
Betances.
si se fue con la de ellos. If he said,
Mhm,
so many times, yeah, well,
mhm.
let's try it your way, let's try
Absolutely,
it your way. Mira,
absolutely,
ya, vamos para encima.
absolutely. And it was always uncomfortable when they talked about each other, because it's as if deep down they felt bad for not supporting Betances, and Betances felt bad that they didn't support him. So they loved each other. They were very good friends. All these group of great patriots loved each other and supported each other and had worked for so many things together. And yeah, it was very intense. So very few people of those famous patriots of that group joined, but other from other places, from Lares, from Mayagüez, um, from Ponce, did join, and people like Lola Rodriguez de Tio, who was only 25. Lola Rodriguez de Tio, the one that wrote the
Wow.
famous poem that
Yes.
became our anthem, she was 25. And Betances said, "I want this person to read to write the anthem," and she did and she later became the greatest writer of the island for decades. Um, and many women were involved as well. Mariana Bracetti. There's many other women that I can mention. Among them, an 18-year-old French girl in La Marias called Justina Roche, and she was famous for being very into fashion and to importing expensive perfume from Paris. What they did not know is that those boxes of imported perfume, she also brought rifles and revolvers.
Oh,
So she was trafficking weapons. So just imagine most of the towns southwest of Puerto Rico filled with revolutionary juntas. We'll never know how many people were involved. I would uh, propose thousands of Puerto Ricans. Why? Because in El Grito de Lares, probably several hundreds and perhaps 1,000 people joined in El Grito de Lares, which were mostly from the Mayagüez Junta and from the uh, Lares junta. So from those committee.
Let me see if I have this
Mhm,
correct. It wasn't just a poverty thing. You had
mhm,
low class, medium class, high class,
mhm,
all
mhm.
pulling machetes and bullets
Yeah,
alongside each
yeah,
other.
yeah,
It
absolutely.
was an island thing. We have to
Yeah,
protect
yeah.
our land. It's not about our social status.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a very tricky thing to do because once people identify the revolution to one social class, you will not attract others. For example, in Mexico, the revolution began with the poor, and that made the white rich say, "Oh, we don't want this." In Venezuela, it was the other way around. The revolution began with the rich white people, and
Hmm.
the poor would say, "A revolution that's for them and won't help
Hmm.
us."
Hmm.
Yeah, how do we know they're going to abolish slavery, right? Um, so
Was
that
there any sort of I'm sorry to cut you off,
mm,
but was there any
mm,
sort of so okay, so the social standing thing they kind of got that figured out unlike Mexico and Venezuela. Was there any sort of like racial obstacles like pure versus mestizos versus like oh you're mixed with this you're mixed with that because I know that
mm,
was an issue
yeah.
in Haiti. But
And in Cuba as well, when the revolution in Cuba began,
yeah.
not everyone agreed with abolishing slavery.
Hmm.
For some reason, Betances was always super clear with that. And the Puerto Rican leadership, uh, both those that embraced the revolution and those that were still attached to reform, they were all abolitionists.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
that's a beautiful thing about Puerto Rican patriots back then. Not all countries in America can boast to say that their patriots were all abolitionists. There's not a single patriot of that time that was against, uh, uh, yeah, of the patriotic leaders of the time, right?
Yeah,
So that's a very cool thing. Yeah.
to have that as your revolutionary disclaimer, like you can join, but if you're not against slavery, go somewhere else. Like I that is semi
Mhm,
unique,
mhm.
I'd say. I can't think of any like
Yeah. Mhm,
at least in the era any examples that are the
Hmm.
same thing.
mhm, mhm, mhm. That makes Betances very clear. He's a very
Hmm.
clear-minded and very coherent. Um, and apparently they followed him with that because when the one of the first things the rebels in Lares did was to declare the abolition of slavery and to declare the independence of Puerto Rico. In Cuba, it took more time to say, is this revolution about slavery or against in favor? It was more
So
gray.
they fought without being 100% clear what the hell they
Mhm.
were fighting for.
At least the beginning, yes.
Oh
At least
wow.
the beginning, yeah. Eventually, they clarified that. But the first years of the Cuban Revolution was you can find some Cubans that were still hoping that they could make an independent Cuba with slaves.
Mm.
Um, so just imagine the southwest of Puerto Rico with all these organizations. I want you, if you can imagine that map of different revolutionary groups throughout the island, I want you also to imagine. I can share the images when we finish. I can share you images of that. The slave rebellions in Puerto Rico were impressive throughout the 1800s. Uh, there were like 4 or 5 rebellions in Ponce, slave rebellions, whether full-blown rebellions or rebellions that were discovered
Documented.
still in their conspiracy phase before
Okay.
reaching
Okay.
the uprising. So either rebellions or conspiracies. Guayama had like 4 or 5, Vega Baja, Vega Alta. The entire island is filled with rebellions from black people. So, and they all failed. That's crazy. And they did not give up. That's really an example of people wanting, said not giving up. How do you?
Okay. We're when we come back. When we come back, we're in the 1860s. We're right before everything explodes.
Mhm.
I just want to ask this before I forget because I had no idea. There were secret organizations in Aguadilla and in Isabela.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
but there was also one of the main guard, Spanish guard, was also in Aguadilla. Was
Yes.
that why wasn't that attacked? It's not. I asked because I literally ran all of Aguadilla and Isabela through the Montes. That's my hometown. So I know, like, you know what, that's not too difficult to go through the montes and get from one side to the other.
Mhm.
Where was the guard in Aguadilla? Do you know exactly? And how come they
Yeah.
didn't attack that?
Yeah. There's some problems in understanding Lares that that should be mentioned. First of all, um, we're not entirely sure what was Betances' full plan for the
Okay.
uprising, and we're not sure if the plan of making the 29th the rebellion was had Betances' last approval, or did the Puerto Ricans in the island decide to go ahead with the 29th as the plan? What we do know is on the 20th they were discovered, uh, and they were forced to do it on the 23rd, but only two of the main uh, revolutionary committees, the one in Lares in 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 Mayagüez. That's why I say I'm sure that it was thousands of people, because if only two groups made 1,000 or so in
Hmm.
only 3 days without much time to prepare, there were probably way more had all the others joined and they had the plan work completely. I also understand that El Grito de Camuy was not meant to be only the uprising Camuy. Part of the plan was simultaneous uprisings across the island to
Mm.
force Spain to fight simultaneous. Uh, yeah,
A war of
warfare.
multiple fronts.
Hmm.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And
That's smart.
and there's a map. There's a famous map that has. I'm going to share it to you later on, and has identified the military bases in Arecibo, in Aguadilla, like you say, and in Ponce, and I think they were planning to attack them as well. So the plan was much more elaborate than what is mostly said. So I think that was also part of the plan. I'm not exactly sure, but I know there was not only uprising in Camuy, but simultaneous uprisings across the island, and they had studied the military garrisons across the island. Yeah.
Apart from, I mean, it's not like I've ran the entire island from top to bottom, but apart from Ponce, the other places that you've mentioned, military wise, Spaniards going to them, those are difficult pueblos to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are watching us that don't know about Puerto Rico, Lares, Camuy, Isabela, and Aguadilla have parts in the mountains that, yeah, okay, it's not fucking Fiji or the Himalayas or anything like that. But if you don't know your way around, everything
Mm-hmm.
from pythons to ants, especially this one plant called la mata de salsa, this shit
Mm-hmm.
will fuck you up. They have barbs. It's like natural barbed wire, and you
Mm-hmm.
won't see it till it grabs you.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
those spots that you're saying, was it because it was a difficult spot to get to? Like, this is the safest place. We're
Mm-hmm.
higher up. We can see before they get to us. Kind of
Mm-hmm.
like when we walk the land in Sabana Grande, where from the top you can see
Mm-hmm.
Guanica, you can see Delta.
Definitely, definitely.
So was it because of that, or was it just
Mhm.
because that's how the movement pushed? Those were the more
Mhm.
affected.
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not sure if I can answer that correctly. I can give you what I can. My impression. My impression is the following. I always felt that uh, some people simplify the revolution, saying, "Up, it succeeded in Cuba, not in Puerto Rico, because Cuba is bigger and has more terrain, and Puerto Rico is smaller, and it's more, and the geography doesn't favor Puerto Rico." And I think that's like geographical determinism, thinking that geography determines everything only without considering the human effort. And when people see geographical uh, obstacles for the Puerto Rican Revolution, I've always thought, like you do, it can work both ways. Those geographical difficulties can be used in your favor against the Spaniards, especially if you know them well from locals.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
a guerrilla tactic could work. Guerrilla, as they said, right? The guerrilla tactics
Right.
could work in Puerto Rico. And I say that the fact that Puerto Rico was small and it was an island, it cannot be the reason. maybe it was influential, but I don't think it was a whole lot influential. I think it had to do more with the efficiency of the network of the Spanish spies, and the fact that they were discovered shortly before, right? I would also, I want to give you examples of how efficient the Spanish spies were. We do have a lot of that information because the Spanish military archives have been published, and they're open to the public now. Some of them are online. Some of them, the full copies, photocopies, are in the University of Puerto Rico, and you'll be surprised how close they were to getting Betances so many times. That's why Betances was moving. Sometimes they would arrive to exactly the place Betances was a day after. So,
wow.
uh,
So
so
cuando
Betances,
hacían la junta, when they would get together to,
yeah.
is it that they would actually get together to have these meetings, the head guys?
Mm-hmm.
So it was Betances and he had his whole crew traveling with him, or they would meet up. Because I mean, all of these guys, I imagine they were known at the time to a degree. It's kind of conspicuous. All of them walking around together.
Yeah.
You see one thug, you see two thugs, you see five thugs walking together. There's going to be some trouble down the block.
Yeah. And there wasn't freedom of association. So even if they weren't planning revolutions.
Because Spain said no freedom of speech and no freedom. Okay, that's right. Okay, yeah.
So those meetings themselves, even before they said a word about revolution, the fact that they were meeting without permission of the government, you would ask permission of the government, everything from meetings like that, were against the law. The fact that they were meeting, and you add that what they were planning, that's even more dangerous, right? Yeah. So the Spanish government knew Betances was up to something, and they exiled him once in 1858, 10 years before Lares, and he returned. Then they exiled him again in 1864, 4 years before Lares, and he returned.
Where was he exiled to?
The first time was in Paris. He went to France. He was kicked out of the island. I'm not sure if they sent him to an exact location. They just told him, you have to leave the island. They were afraid of arresting him because he was well loved by everyone. The poor loved him because he gave them free medical attention and service. The slaves loved him because he gave freedom to many of the slaves individually with his own money. And
I learned about that. He would pay $25 at the moment of a specific black slave child's baptism in order to obtain his papers.
Absolutely.
Then give him his freedom. Wow.
Agua de la Libertad. That's amazing. Yeah. Along with Ruy Belvis. That was one of the things that made people love him even more, especially white liberals that had beautiful ideas but were afraid to implement them. They would say, okay, this guy is like me, but there's a difference that he actually does it. Yeah. And so he was well loved, so they couldn't arrest him. It was easier to exile him, and that really screwed his life, by the way. That in the first exile ruined his wedding. He was going to get married, and they canceled the wedding. He moved to France. His fiancée traveled to France to see him, but she had never been in the winter in Europe, and she got sick and died. And so Betances got completely screwed by that. He went into depression and everything, and it took a while to. It was horrendous, and it took him at least a year to recover and continue the revolutionary work. So he was really, really committed and never gave up on that. So 58 at least to 68. The year before, he was forced to exile. Spain would say, I will eliminate the revolution if Betances is away. And he was permanently exiled since 67. But he continued to communicate with the locals in Puerto Rico. There's one photograph of one of those juntas. I just can't believe that photograph exists. There's a photograph of the junta of Lares. And it's surreal, completely surreal. I'm going to see if I can find it and share it to you so you can post it on your site.
Yes, definitely. So what was the moment that they said, okay, we're going to attack Lares?
Okay. 1820, Spain discovers. I think it is not clear how Spain discovered. The two theories you said uh, are basically uh, the most accepted one, either one or the other. But there's
Either there
also
was a rat or a Spaniard overheard.
exactly, yes. I've heard one scholar believe that there's something fishy about both, and maybe there's another reason we don't know. Uh, so it smells like treason. It smells like treason, and it is very likely treason because you see the pattern before and how Spain discovered the others. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. It was the 20th, and they attacked the. Wow, this is a big deal. They attacked Lanzao del Norte. Lanzao del Norte was the main revolutionary group in Camuy, the place the revolution was going to happen. They arrested the dude. They broke into his house like in 5 a.m. in the morning, 1820. There were gunshots from his house. They took him to the mayor's house where the prison was back then. Back in the day, the mayor house, the town hall, had the prison. They did not know that the mayor was part of the or secret organization. He was secretly one of the rebels. So the mayor was supposed to punish this rebel, sent a message to the revolutionary junta in Lares. So some of the secret rebels in Lares in Camuy, after fighting the Spanish authorities, decided to make a run for it and go to Camuy. So they went up the mountains because Camuy and Lares are touching each other, right? One is in the
Right.
coast, the other is in the mountain. And they inform Manuel Rojas. Manuel Rojas was the leader of Centro Bravo, the Revolutionary Committee of Lares, and he had a finca, a hacienda of cafe there, and that's in the place called Barrio Pezuela. And he decided,
Oh wow, Sandy's family's from Pezuelas.
really, Lares
Yes.
Pezuela. Wow, amazing, amazing. So that's I don't hear that often. I don't know many. I know people from Lares, but not everyone can tell me I'm from Pezuela, Lares. It's amazing. A lot of honor there. So that's where the revolution began. That's where the Grito began. And he's in 1820. He's in 1820. 1868. It's September 20.
Hmm.
I think it's September 21 already because it took a while for them to arrive there. So they tried to send a message to the other revolutionaries. They knew there wasn't enough time to reach everyone. They would say, let's try to get those from Mayagüez, because Mayagüez at that point was still the top city. Ponce was getting there, but Ponce was not yet what it came to be a few years later. So Mayagüez was still the number one city in the Southwest. So
Okay.
maybe that's the reason they prioritized with Mayagüez. Mayagüez had a revolutionary committee called Capa Prieto, led by a guy called Matias Bruckman, and they joined on the 23rd in Barrio Pezuela in the farm of Manuel Rojas. Eh, but those of Ponce did not get to know in time. Apparently, they also hope that even those rebels that did not get the message on time would realize what would happen if they would see the rebellion.
Now, how are
And
they getting? Let me real
Mhm.
quick. How are they getting these messages across?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Probably directly.
Horseback. I don't know. A barefoot kid with a knapsack. I don't know. Messenger pigeons.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably horseback, or I would guess horseback or running. Right. Um, that would be probably what I've can
I mean,
imagine the
I
most.
asked about the messenger pigeons. I don't know how far back the messenger pigeons
Mhm,
go in Puerto
mhm,
Rico,
mhm.
but I've seen some amazing birds, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Yo, this time is
Yeah.
world known, and this, that, and the
Wow.
other."
Wow. So, well, I haven't heard about that during the revolution, but definitely, message by horse and by foot would be my guess. And the guys from Mayagüez arrived. I would like to make a comment here because just a few hours ago, um, there was a post I shared about the map of all the Puerto Rican revolutions, And there's a dude that repeated one of the propaganda from the Spanish government that is still being repeated by some people today. Um, and he would say the revolution was instigated by foreigners. It was not a Puerto Rican revolution, he would say, because Manuel Rojas, the leader in uh, Lares, was born in Venezuela,
Oh,
and Bruckmann was born in New Orleans. He was a French American from New Orleans, you know. But that is misleading. They focus on those two who were not the leaders of the revolution. By the
Right.
way, they were just the emergency leaders because Betances could not arrive on
They were
time.
delegates.
Absolutely, yes, and they
Okay.
were as Puerto Rican as anyone because they had sacrificed everything for a cause. They had lived in Puerto Rico for many years, and they were willing to die for their country. So I don't think what is more Puerto Rican than that.
They weren't
So
born there though.
no, but it's always debatable because
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
Puerto Rico has a way of just making you hers if she
yeah,
wants to.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Tony Croato is Puerto Rican, and he was not born here. He was born in Italy, I think. Uh, and Manuel Rojas was born in Venezuela, but his father was a Puerto Rican soldier that moved to Venezuela. So, and to say that Bruckmann was American is also a bit confusing because he was born only a few years after the U.S. bought Louisiana.
from the
So
French.
from the French. So a few, yeah. So he was more French minded than anything, you know.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then they said Betances' father was Dominican, and I'm like, okay, make up your mind. If you want to say that Betances was foreign because his father was Dominican, then we could agree that Manuel Rojas was Puerto Rican because his father was Puerto Rican,
A
even though he
Puerto
was
Rican
born in.
soldier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So those people that repeat that don't realize that they're repeating Spanish propaganda since El Grito de Lares because Spain was terrified that people interpreted El Grito de Lares as expression of Puerto Rican identity. They had to say, no,
I
this is
think
not
we
Puerto
can
Rican.
do a whole podcast just on Spanish propaganda that we
Absolutely.
take as facts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
And
even propaganda in general, but yeah.
definitely. And the 1,000 people that joined, most of them were Puerto Rican, if not all of them, you know. So they meet in Lares and they decide to begin El Grito from the finca to downtown Lares. And they arrive at night and there's a gunfight. Because they attacked the town by surprise, it was a swift success. There were some wounded, uh, and they arrested the Spanish soldiers in the town hall in la alcaldía. Uh, Manuel Rojas brought down the Spanish flag. Right, they put the flag of the revolution. They sang the anthem. According to some sources, they sang the anthem. They also put the flag on the altar of the church. They did a very Hispanic thing. In almost all revolutions in Latin America, they have a moment in which they praise God and make a very old Catholic prayer called El Te Deum, which is a very solemn thing when you thank God for something very unique that happens uh, once in a lifetime. You know, so they prayed a Te Deum. Um, it was part of the things the ceremonial activity, right? They made speeches against Spain, Muerte a España, speeches in favor of Puerto Rico, Viva la Revolución, and that must have been very emotional to scream Viva Puerto Rico with all your heart.
And you just took over the fucking town.
Mhm.
Absolutely. After years of only saying it in secret, Viva Puerto Rico, you know, Viva Puerto Rico. You
Yeah.
could only, if people outheard you. So to scream
And
it, to say, I'm not afraid anymore. We're gonna, if anyone hears you, there's no turning back. Betances
yeah.
would say the revolution is like hell. Once you step on it, there's no turning back. The government will never cease uh, to hunt you. You know. So after that, they made a revolutionary government, a provisional government. They name a president, they name a secretary, they made a government, and they planned to make elections as soon as the revolution had triumphed in enough places. Uh, but they needed some sort of government at first.
So the
Some would
guy
say,
they put in charge, the president
"Hmm,
that I was looking up, and a lot of places, maybe I was just looking in the wrong references. that not much is known about him beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
One of my questions was going to be, were they planning to have some type of an election so they can actually, put somebody
Yeah.
up there who they feel is prepared for it? And part of my French, who the fuck was that dude for them to, because we know nothing about him.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, Betances and them, they and Rojas and all them,
Yeah,
they did,
yeah, yeah.
but we don't. So
Yes.
before that time, who is anything known about him?
Are we talking about Francisco Ramirez Medina?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. That's
Okay.
the dude. Yes,
Okay.
definitely. Um, he was a landowner. Si mal no recuerdo, if my memory doesn't fail me, he was a landowner of sugar of coffee hacienda there in Lares as well. He was part of Centro Bravo. He was not the leader of Centro Bravo. Leader of Centro Bravo was Manuel Rojas. But I think that it was an important move because it could give other people that had not decided whether to join the revolution or not some sort of sense of security to say this is not a riot, this will
Mhm.
have a government, um, and it is not a military dictatorship either. They want to create a civilian group, so it's not only the guys with the machetes and the guns, so I think that was very important. For some would say, isn't it too early to create a government? um, but I think it was not pretentious at all, contrary
Mm-mm.
to what other people would say. President and everything, they just took over the town. uh, President, provisional president, then we'll have elections, and we'll have an official one, just like Washington, for example. Washington was the 11th or 12th president. There
So
were
they
many other.
so they were conscious of that, we're doing this for our freedom.
Uh-huh.
If we do this without some type of structure, we're just terrorists.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And they send a message across the world to other countries. Well, I'm not sure if that message ever got across, but
Right.
part of the purpose of that is to tell other countries we're in a state of war. There's an official war between an official government of Puerto Rico and the government of Spain, to give it a formality. So it's not anarchy, it's not chaos. Manuel Rojas was asked to continue the fight and to attack San Sebastián del Pepino. And originally, the leaders of the militia in San Sebastián uh, were in the revolution and would join the revolution as soon as the revolutionaries arrived to San Sebastián, right? If I think it was like 400 or 500 of them that marched towards San Sebastián the next day, the 24th of September. I can recommend two songs for that. This group called Cultura Profética that makes some awesome reggae has a song called Lucha y Sacrificio that narrates the battle of El Pepino, right? And it's a very good one. And there's another one from Tito Auger, who is the main voice in Fiel a la Vega, wrote a song that's titled Lares, that for me it's a masterpiece. It talks about the rebellion in Lares and the subsequent battle of El Pepino in San Sebastián, which is incredibly symbolic. There's a lot of symbols here. By the way, I didn't say this earlier, but the 29th of September is the feast of Saint um, Michael, the archangel.
What's that?
And for Catholics is a very important thing because he's the angel that defeats Satan,
Yeah.
And for Black people, they had fused that idea of a powerful spirit that defeats demons with their own Yoruba gods and beliefs, and it became like a symbol that was powerful both for Catholics and for Espiritistas and Africans that worship their own African religions with this mixture of Christian elements, right? And also that day was the free day of slaves. The 29th of September is a day the slaves would have a day off. Also,
Mhm.
Betances and Betances wanted to include the slaves there, right?
Right.
And Betances was from Cabo Rojo, and the patron saint of Cabo Rojo is Saint Michael, the archangel. So that's a very cool thing there. And I'll tell you something about this 29th later on. because there was also a revolution in Spain that same day, the 29th of September. Had El Grito Lares been El Grito Camuy, it would be simultaneous to a rebellion in Spain that overthrew the queen and developed a democratic government in Spain, which is still a mystery. It's enigmatic, but there might be a connection because Betances was a Freemason, and some of the leaders in Spain were Freemasons as well.
That was going to be my next question. What's
Yeah.
the plan to be like that?
No. I refuse to believe that was a coincidence. It because it just goes back to this conversation an hour and 9 seconds ago. This was a spark and the fuse and little bits of dynamite. No. That wasn't a coincidence. Fuck that. I refuse.
So that's the 29th. And the 24th has a element too as well, because the Battle of El Pepino occurs in a place that we call now San Sebastian, the patron saint. And San Sebastian, if you see paintings of San Sebastian, he is a saint that is tied to a tree and with arrows attached, hit by arrows. So he's a martyr. He died for his ideals. So a martyr in Christianity is someone that dies for his ideals. In the revolution, a martyr is someone that dies for freedom, for
the cause,
independence, for the cause. Absolutely. So San Sebastián del Pepino is similar to the saint, the symbol of the sacrifice and the people that died there. Among the leaders was a jíbaro called Manolo Leñero. Among the rebels, he was not leader in organizing, but he was just a brave, very brave jíbaro that was the guy carrying the flag, and it was a very strong lumberjack, leñero, they would say. And he had the flag in front of everyone. That takes some guts to do that. And he became legendary, Manolo Leñero. And they arrive at El Pepino, and they it's early in the morning. I think it's like 7 or 8, something like that. They march street after street, and initially they do have a success. Spain fights back. They were waiting for them, and that surprised the rebels, and they were forced to retreat. But then
because the message hadn't gotten around yet, right? That
it might be. Okay. But either way, they decided to go a second time, and they went further to the town, and they had divided the forces. The town has 3 main entrances. Right. And they put rebels in different entrances, and some were sent to Moca to bring rebels there and to come back. So the plan had been thought right there. Well, yeah, which is very close. The second time, they're forced to retreat again, but they push forward after resting. Gunshots everywhere. Just imagine that. Machetes and rifles, until they reach the main plaza in front of the church and alcaldía and everything. Spectacular. Just imagine the people of El Pepino, San Sebastián, waking up and looking from their windows. And when they got there, more soldiers were there, and they were well equipped and shot at several of the rebels. Many of them wounded, others had already died in battle. And they retreated a third time after crossing through at least half of the main plaza. They were forced to retreat in front of the church, and Manuel Rojas did not give up. Manuel Rojas said, let's go again. Manolo Leñero, the guy with the flag, was gunned down, and he died shortly after of his wounds. And then they heard, vienen los voluntarios. Los voluntarios are the Spanish volunteers that joined. And there was confusion. There were very few voluntarios that were coming, had they known. But at this point, the pressure was being felt very strongly. Perhaps had they known that there were a few that would push again, but the people with Manuel Rojas said, don't go again. We're going to be trapped. If we push one last time and these soldiers arrive, we'll be trapped. And reluctantly, Manuel Rojas decides to retreat from El Pepino after several deaths and several wounded, right? Yeah, it was very heartbreaking to lose El Pepino and to think that the plan was going to work and not understanding, saying, what the hell is going on? The militia is supposed to join us. Come on. At some point, I read that he screamed at the militia, say, "Come on, what are you waiting for? Join. This is the moment."
Wow.
Had the plan worked, they would throw their guns and join the rebellions or something. There's something very sneaky going on there. And they returned to Lares, and once they got it downtown in Lares, um, the pressure was felt because the Spanish forces were arriving from different parts, and they did not see the cry of freedom uh, sparking everywhere. Betances had an awful time. Betances suffered so much that people were fighting and he was not there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the end, Manuel Rojas and the others decide to leave Lares, downtown Lares, and go back to the hacienda in Pezuela and organize guerrilla warfare from the mountains. The Spanish retake Lares, uh, and then they arrive to the hacienda. No one's there. Rojas and Bruckmann continue to fight for many weeks more. And then the arrest began. They started arresting people everywhere, hundreds of people, perhaps even perhaps even 1,000. The prisons of Aguadilla, the prisons of Arecibo were packed. Uh, a, a woman was taken to prisoner as well, Mariana Bracetti, the one that wove the flag.
Right.
And the conditions were so awful that at least 80 of them died out of diseases, and it was horrendous. And they ended up arresting some of the reformists that did not join Betances because they refused to betray Betances or did not get down on their ideals. They agreed with Betances on ideals, not on the methods, and they were still
Now did the Grito de Lares spark all of the torture on behalf of Spain, or was it already existing?
I believe it was
What
already
more
existing.
torture, right? You're pulling slaves off a fucking field and just getting hung if you even spoke of revolution.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it got a lot worse.
Yeah.
Even though it's hard to think what's more, what's worse than getting popped in the head. They found out quite a few ways of making it a lot worse.
Yes. I can answer that later on when I tell you the governor that came after Lares. But talking about torture, at some point, there's a detail that I haven't seen in any book except one. There's a dude that interviewed Jibaros from Adjuntas and got a witness of what happened to Bruckmann and Rojas at the end. In the end, the Spanish forces, after fighting the remaining rebels in the mountains and guerrilla tactics, discovered in the morning Bruckmann and Rojas while they were still sleeping, right? And they barely had enough time to react to the Spanish forces and get their guns to defend themselves. Bruckmann was gunned down just as he was getting his rifle and killed on the spot, right? So that's when people say Bruckmann was not Puerto Rican, I'd say, well, I don't care if he's born in anywhere, in Washington, D.C. or New York. He died for our country.
Mm-hmm.
And famously, Rojas was taken prisoner and not killed. But according to that Jibaro witness, they tied him upside down to a tree with his hands like a piñata and hit him with the back of the bayonets. They spit on his face and they took his beard and ripped it off of his flesh with like that, a horrendous thing. They broke his teeth until someone had to say, stop this, this is not humane, this is not.
Well, I'm trying to find out a bit more information on the exact weapons, but just to give everybody a worse image, yes, a bayonet is pretty much a fighting knife that has a fixture that allows you to put it at the end of a rifle. Okay. Depending on what bayonet and where it's coming from, if it's American made, British made, Spanish made, whatever, some of them come with what's called a skull crusher, which means the end. I don't have anything that actually has what's called, no jokes, a butt cap, right? And it goes at the end. See the blade, it'll go at the end here. Usually it's like a dome with a point at the end. And it's called a skull crusher because it can crush. So you're telling me if they hit him with the end of the bayonet, with the back part of the bayonet, if it had a skull crusher, they might as well have fucking stabbed him. If they did some damage that I know he didn't live through that, right? There's no way he did. That's some serious damage.
Yeah, he survived, and he was forced to exile, and not much is known about Manuel Rojas later on. Apparently, he will not be involved in the next revolutionary activity. Sometimes I get the impression that he was like, I retire from this, perhaps because of how awful the experience was.
You think?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, definitely. So after that happened, the torture was going to be horrendous. The execution was going to be horrendous. But there's a message from Spain and said, hold it right there. Spain has changed. The Queen is no longer in charge. We are in a phase of democratic experiment. So Spain has a revolution in September 29th, 1868. They overthrow the Queen. They create a sort of democratic government that tried different experiments, including creating a republic, the Republic of Spain. And there's another revolution in Cuba of independence. So 3 revolutions happening at the same time: Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Spain. And Spain gets the message and says, we need to treat Puerto Rico better, because Cuba is, if we want to avoid another Cuba that's fighting a 10-year war of independence from 68 to 78, that's a massive war. The Cuban War of Independence was among the bloodiest and most intense of all the Americas. And they would say, Puerto Rico has proven it can bite. Cuba is showing us what Puerto Rico could have been had we been less lucky. And Spain is more open to change, and they decide to implement reforms. They allow Puerto Ricans to have elections, to choose representatives to go to Spanish Cortes. They allowed some relative freedom of speech, some freedom of association. They allow political parties to exist, and they allowed the debate to abolish slavery. And slowly, the politicians managed to convince Spain to abolish slavery in 1873. So that's eternal debate. This happens in many countries, that reformists and revolutionaries end up competing on the credit, right? The reformists would say, you see what I tell you? Revolution was not necessary. You had to be more patient. We fix things by civilized way, right?
But look at everything that pushed until that time. I mean, how many were going to be left by the time would they even have sat down to try to make a decision like that if this hadn't happened?
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, it kind of sounds fucked up, you know what I mean? But it is my way. Normally, you won't pop the titty in the baby's mouth until he starts fucking crying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like, so that was the cry. That was the grito.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of things that happen afterwards in history. But since we are talking about the Grito Lares, and it is September 23rd, you know what I mean? Let's keep to that year.
Sure.
Now, from that year on to now, 2021, how is it that they started doing the commemorations of it? And why do you think it's so important? Because if you do, because I haven't even asked you that. To me, it is, because I wouldn't have learned a lot about myself if it wasn't for the Grito Lares. I was born and raised in Brooklyn for 11 years in East New York. So not even the people in Brooklyn don't want to even accept where I'm from, you know? And East New York is still in Brooklyn. It's like, no, keep them over there. I was born and raised there for 11 years. When I got to Puerto Rico, 2 weeks later, I had to start middle school. I knew nothing of Spanish. Literally, bendición, café, and hormiga. Those are the 3 fucking words that I knew in Spanish. How the hell was that going to help me in 7th grade? You know? And I was always pushed away. You know, the New Yorican. The fuck is your problem if being, speaking English and listening to hip hop is Nuyorican? But hey, I guess that's what I am. When I come to realize, like, wait a minute, there's a huge difference, because usually people that are under that generalization don't know the culture the way those who actually live it and suffered through it and have family that's pushed that history down. We don't have that in the States.
No.
So when I went over there, it was difficult because it was like, you don't know your history, you don't know your culture, you really don't know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Grito was when I found all these old guys that wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one specific one, Helena Valentin. He actually gave class to my dad in New York for a year, and they met up and all of that, and they got along really well. And I didn't know until not too long ago that Helena Valentin's son that he lost, unfortunately, was also named Joey. So he took to me and he's talking to me and all this, and I had no idea. I've met Berrio. I walked around with Lolita. I've met all these guys that are in that movement, and I had no idea who they were. They were treating me for who I was and giving me information. There's this. I think I'm gonna say Caucasian because I don't know exactly where he's from. He's a white guy, and I spoke to him once, and he has not broken down Spanish, but a very thick English accent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you speak to him in English, he'll answer you in Spanish. And I asked him once, like, why don't you answer me in English if it's obvious you understand English? He says, I refuse to speak that language until this island is free.
Wow.
Damn.
And I'm talking 12, 15, 17 years straight. That dude's there every year.
Wow.
And he always has books. What I mean? And here, and then books, it's worth $30 here. Just give me 10. Oh, you like it that much? Well, here, just take it home, read it. They're really quick to teach you what the culture is and who we are as Puerto Ricans, as Borincanos. So that's why, at least in my point of view, why it is very necessary to, for lack of a better word, celebrate it. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would agree. We celebrate the ideals that were defended in Grito Lares. We obviously don't celebrate its defeat, but we celebrate that it's the birth of a nation. In my opinion, it's the birth of Puerto Rico as a nation in many ways, because sometimes, me as a scholar, I emphasize that a nation is when a group of people have an identity, a collective identity. They feel as one because they feel identified with the history and with a culture they share. That's, for me, for many years has been the definition of a nation, which is independent of what political status we have. We might be a colony of China or Canada, of any country, but as long as we feel Puerto Rican, we're a nation. We're obviously not an independent nation, but we're a nation that is regardless of independence, right? So we're not a mere territory, Estado Libre Asociado. These are all political terms, but collectively we're a nation. But now I add something else that I feel every day is equally important. That identity is not only about the past and the culture. That identity is a project we do together. We all feel more connected to the people that we have a same project with, a same goal, a same foundation, a same group, a same problem we're trying to fix. So, as they say, proyecto de país, a project for the country, a goal for the country, an initiative, a movement of people fighting for the same ideals. It's that they can see themselves as one. I feel identified with the future they want. So if 1,000 people gathering together, and probably thousands of more, I keep on thinking that it's probably thousands would have been there had the other groups of Mayagüez, of Ponce, of Arecibo, of all the others joined, several thousands perhaps, but at least a few thousands, prove that they had they're willing to sacrifice it all. It's not that they have a common goal. It's that they have a goal they have sacrificed everything for, their own freedom, their own security, their own family, because they can lose being with their family for the rest of their lives. So I think that's the birth of a nation that between 68 and 98, it was celebrated by the rebels abroad and in Puerto Rico secretly, but it was not
Really?
officially celebrated. Yeah.
I
And
had no idea.
yeah. The rebels valued that date, but the propaganda was tough. Everyone in the government and writers would say, yeah, that was just uh, an affair, a short affair that did not last long. When Betances dies in 98 and Americans take over in 98, suddenly, for the next 25 years, El Grito Lares was no longer controversial. And people were allowed to speak openly about it because the Americans won't be annoyed. The Americans will not feel that it's something against them. It's something, a fight you had with your former masters. We were better than you. So Betances, painting the picture of Betances was being publicly displayed in government places. That's something that really surprises me. And in 1920, 101 years ago, a group of Puerto Rican patriots went to Paris, to France, to bring the remains of Betances, brought them to Puerto Rico to bury them in Cabo Rojo, and 20,000 people arrived.
I saw
25 years
first
after
that.
his death. No, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
50 years but after the last time he was actually here, you can see the National Guard, the U.S. National Guard, standing in honor, saluting the remains of Betances. The president of the Senate, the president of the House, carrying the remains of Betances. And that tells you two things. First, how people remembered him and how much they valued what he did, even decades after his death and half a century after the last time he was here. But also reminds you that it was comfortable for the U.S. to talk about Betances because there wasn't a new revolutionary movement in Puerto Rico since 98 till that moment.
Isn't
And
there
that,
a bust of Betances in Lares in the plaza?
yes, absolutely. And that's where Albizu steps in. Because of Betances' remains, many of them said, you're independentista, I'm the independentista. We all believe independence. What are we waiting for? And they established next year El Partido Nacionalista in 1921. So Betances' dead is already inspiring people to create a new party, the Nationalist Party. Later, Albizu became president in 1930, and Albizu made sure that the monument of Betances was made well. And in 1930, I think Albizu started celebrating El Grito de Lares in Lares. He brought a tree. He brought a seed from a tree of Bolivar down in Colombia and planted it in Lares as a continuity of the independence of Latin America.
A tamarind tree.
Absolutely. And that's so epic. And Albizu told Betances el padre de la patria. So that's a
Okay,
big
wait. Hold on. So El Palo, oh, I'm sorry, guys. This is a bilingual show. El Palo que está al lado de donde ellos suben la bandera.
Mhm.
That's it?
I don't
Like,
remember.
is the tree still there?
It was planted at the Plaza de la Revolución with soil taken from the 18 other Spanish-speaking Latin
Yeah, but
American
which one? I
countries.
think there's like 3 different trees.
Uh,
So I'm trying to mentally place myself
Yes.
which one of the trees.
Yes, you're right. I'm not sure. It got me there.
it's one of those.
It's one of them.
I was when you mentioned his name, it brought me back. When he became president, Abisu, I could tell he was kind of a hard ass, maybe.
Right back, guys.
Yeah, I can tell he was kind of a hard ass, maybe. I don't know if your historical documents say otherwise, but he wanted to get rid of like frivolous celebrations and things like that have to do with Lares, like a fundraiser that was apparently starting to become a thing. He got rid of it, and he one of his better known quotes was, I was just saying, Joey, that when Aviso became president, he wanted to get rid of frivolous things that had to do with the celebration of Lares, like a fundraiser being an example. But
Mhm.
one of his
Well, you
famous.
know what? Hold on. Before you continue, let me tell you, there have been a few years that
Mhm.
I've gone that I actually get upset. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? You want to have bacalaitos and frituras, and you have to because fuck, we're hungry. And the la heladeria, the one that makes like the rice and beans ice creams and all those crazy ice creams, that shit better be open. You know what I'm saying? But you'll see artesanos doing not their best work.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Not all of them, but I know this because my parents son artesano,
Okay.
licensed artesano. So I get to actually meet the people, not just see their work. And you see a lot of half-assing. You see a lot of young guys and young ladies come in, and they're just there to get drunk and
Mhm.
party like it's
Mhm.
spring break.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And I never took that mentality, even when I was young. And I've been going since I was like
Mhm.
12.
Mhm.
You know, I never took that mentality. I'm one of the few, if not the only one of two, that have ever gone there with a flag of Islam
Mhm.
Mm.
on from the nation of the gods and earth, the 5%ers. I've always been in there deep. You know, I've stepped in there with a Bible, a Quran, three Albisu books, and another fucking
Mhm.
that just in case anybody wants to debate me on anything, let's go. I'm here to learn and to, you know, and to see a lot of made in Taiwan or, you know, just stuff that isn't handmade from Puerto Rico being sold there and pushed there, it aggravates. It
Mhm.
disgusts. So yeah,
Mhm.
I just saw it's not back then, you know, it's not just a past thing. It's
Yeah.
something that unfortunately I can't say it's every year.
Hmm.
It'll jump uno que otro, but yeah, you still see it, bro.
According to this thing I found, he would agree with you in a lot of things. He got rid of frivolous activities like a it was a fundraise. The thing I mentioned earlier was a fundraising dance. So it was an annual party, a good place to get drunk, Joey, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So a lot of those things were terminated, and a series of rituals to commemorate the event in a dignified manner were instituted. One
Uh-huh.
of his better known quotes, well, maybe sure, but one of his
If you're gonna
better,
have dance, I would say have your trovadores like they
yeah.
do every now and then because trovadores are the original MCs. They will
Mhm.
battle each other,
Mhm.
you know, because that's what the trovadores do.
Mhm.
You battle each other with the décimas.
Yeah,
Boom.
yeah.
Or have the bomba en plena playing con los juegos de garote.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as the music, you have to have music. It's Puerto Rico. You have to have fucking music.
Yeah. I don't know what this dance he
You
got
want
rid
to
of
do a
pertained
fundraiser,
to, but
fine, but where are the funds going?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's where
I
I'll
think
have a problem with it.
the way I see it, it does match what I understand of Albizu. It does match other things he's has done, um, and I think it has to do a lot with avoiding it becoming a touristic thing of folkloric nationalism. Albizu criticized, and many pro-independence people today criticize the nationalism that's only folklore, that's only entertainment, that's only fun, uh,
Like in
and
Hawaii,
yeah, and not commit. Absolutely, yeah, and not committed. So he would say nationalism that has to be political, that has to be to ask for independence, not only uh, talk about a cool popular dude, um, but it has to be uncomfortable. It can't be too comfortable. Litorales can't be too comfortable because we're still in that problem. We haven't fixed that problem of colonialism. So, uh, and there's a gap. There's a gap between Betances and Albizu. Between Betances and Albizu, many years passed, and no one retook the flag of independence in a militant way. There were many intellectuals. There were many people writing poems, wonderful poems, but
and skirmishes, you still had your fights here and there, just not as big as lives.
exactly not and not in an organized way. So I think that's part of what Betances,
The last
what
organized one was the La Intentona, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I still see it as a part of Betances project, because unlike the other ones before Betances set in motion something that has a continuity. People of La Intentona Yauco were still connected to the ones that made Lares, still in communication. So it is a tradition that lasted 40 years, since 58 to 98, nonstop, a collaboration among people. It was a network. That network was dismantled, and Albizu had to start from scratch, you know. And there's other things that remind us on the 23rd of September. Remember that Filiberto was killed the 23rd of September,
Yes.
2005.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
So that's like a reminder of saying maybe that's what Albizu was trying to tell us. Um, everyone was celebrating Lares 25, and the last machatero standing was being killed by
That
the
was a
FBI.
bittersweet year for me because
Mhm.
before they killed Filiberto, I was walking arm in arm with Lolita Lebron.
Mm.
You know, she looked at me. She's like, "De quién tú eres?" Like, those of you who are watching this who don't know, it is very normal for a Puerto Rican grandma to look at you and go, "De quién tú eres?"
Mhm. Mhm.
She did that. I
Absolutely.
told her who granduncle was. You know, she goes, "Fidel Vélez." Looked at me from top to bottom, walked me around. And for about a half hour, I was her personal bodyguard. I wouldn't let anybody get close to that lady. So it was just
Wow.
like I was in heaven. I get home, I get it on. I find it on the news. It was like that was a horrible, horrible day.
Mhm. Mhm.
So once again, just like the actual occurrences of the Grito Lares, it has bitter and it has sweet. I'm with you. I decided to commemorate it
Mhm.
in a good way. That we're still
Mhm.
here, we're still fighting, we're still going to get this done. And I'm sure that even afterwards, after it's all said and done, we're still going to commemorate it.
Yeah,
Betances put a lot of pieces in motion.
definitely, definitely. I agree.
Guys, thank you everybody for tuning in. My guests,
Thank
don't
you.
hang up yet. We're going to talk a
Okay,
little bit in the
sure.
studio. Everybody who is watching, thank you for tuning in. This is Shoot the Shit with Joey Zaza. We got John, we got Riestra. Any ideas, send it in, email me. We'll make it happen, all right? Have a good one.
Buenas noches. I'll see you.